All right, we're back with story time. Trying a new angle here. Sorry if the lighting's not so great. So we're in the second book, actually, in my Light of Infinite series. This one called The Exodus of Darkness, which we're jumping in this week, paralleling with the Torah portion of Shemot of Exodus. And this chapter is called Rescue the Needy. All right, so I remember being a music director at WMUC in Maryland, College Park. I was in college, and record labels would send in their music with one sheets, which is basically the accompanying page with an elevator pitch so that you should like the band and play them on the radio, hoping their songs would make it into our radio station's rotation. And I saw one album named Pharaoh's Daughter that caught my attention. It was released by Michael Dorf from his Knitting Factory record label. And he had a Jewish imprint of this label, and he was running the Knitting Factory clubs, and maybe you know the City Winery, that's another one of his projects. I first heard of it because this hip-hop group, The Roots, who you know, Questlove and Black Thought, and some incredible New York free jazz musicians I followed had always played there. I eventually ended up playing there a bunch as well. In the future, I found myself performing at Knitting Factory and befriending Michael Dorf, the owner. While in college, it was just a place I knew about. I opened the Pharaoh's Daughter CD, and I saw it was composed by Basia Schechter. I was curious to hear what sort of music would come via this hipster jazz club. It was a mix of Sephardic and Ashkenazic tones, but in such an original way, some stripped down, others more fully composed, but all with the heart of Basia throughout. Music has the power to remind us of our roots, the ancient lineage that we continuously emerge from, the antiquity of the art that surrounds the historic memories that inform our traditions. When we hear beautiful Jewish music, it hits my soul, at least, in a different way than when I hear an equally incredible composition from, say, Bon Iver. Jewish music evokes the Beit HaMikdash, the Holy Temple, and the lyrics are generally inspired by passages from the Torah or Torah ideas, and of course a lot by Melech David, King David from Tehillim. What comes from the heart enters the heart, and nothing resonates more than the truth. Torah is truth and synonymous with water because both water and Torah give us life. Music steeped in Torah brings life because that is the well from which it's drawn. In our parasha, in this Torah portion, Pharaoh's daughter pulls Moshe from the water to save him, bringing redemption to an entire nation on the brink of destruction. She named him Moshe, Moses, meaning the one who is drawn from the water. The gematria numerical value of Moshe is 345, which represents redemption. Rabbi Natan of Breslov teaches that Moshe elevates the Jews from Shmad, destruction, which is 344, to Ratzon, which is divine favor, which is 346. Batya, Pharaoh's daughter, was also transformed from idolatry to favor by converting. As it says in Talmud Sota, which is the Gemara, she went to cleanse herself of her father's idolatry. Perhaps the most incredible part of our Exodus and redemption is that it was brought on by Moshe, who grew up in the house of our oppressor. As mentioned in the previous chapter, which you'll have to get the book to read, who did not fall into the falsities and niceties that one would tend to grow accustomed to growing up as the son of the king. One would think our redemption would come through the person who is as far physically as one could get from the king, from Pharaoh, but Abarbanel points out that the murder of the Egyptian, the quarrel of the two Israelites, and the rescue of Yitro's daughter are mentioned right after we are told that Moshe grew up in the Pharaoh's house to teach us of Moshe's spiritual greatness. Ibn Ezra argues that perhaps Hashem caused Moshe to grow up in a royal palace so that his soul would be on a high level of study and behavior rather than the low expectations of a slave. Had things been otherwise, would Moshe have killed the Egyptian for his violent act or saved Yitro's daughters from being harassed by the shepherds of Midian who were stealing their water? Had Moshe grown up amongst his brethren, and been familiar to them from his youth, they would not have revered him, for they would have considered him one of them. So these are all different takes on, that Moshe, the person who becomes our ultimate redeemer and brings the light in the Torah, is someone who is coming from the depths of darkness and despair and destruction and all of the things that ancient Egypt represent and all the things that Pharaoh represents. The same way we feel the music of our past echoing in the present, Moshe felt and knew that he was not Egyptian. Despite his upbringings and surroundings, he knew that he was a Hebrew, an Israelite. Moshe had an attachment to Yocheved, his nursemaid, and her children. He later found out that he was her son and that her children were his siblings. As the saying goes, the truth always comes out in the end. It was then that Moshe grew up and he went out to his brethren and saw their suffering. Later in this Torah portion, it says, Moshe, Hashem saw that he turned aside to see. This is referring to Moshe's leaving his own comforts to witness the pain and suffering of others and acting on it. Keep in mind, this is the son of the king. He's being raised as Pharaoh's son. He can not worry about any of these things and just bask in the glory of being rich and living in this palace and being basically in charge of the entire universe. This is what made Moshe worthy of being the redeemer and leader of B'nei Yisrael, which are the children of Israel. It's something we all need to continuously learn from. It is not enough to see and feel empathetic towards someone else's suffering. We must also act on it and work to redeem that suffering. Just as Hashem, as God articulates for us in this Torah portion, I have indeed seen the affliction of my people that is in Egypt, and I have heard its outcry because of its taskmasters. For I have known of its suffering. I shall descend to rescue it from the hand of Egypt and to bring it up from the land to a good, spacious land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So it's this continuous idea of leaving constriction, of leaving Egypt, which in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which the root is Meitzar, this constricted consciousness, this constricted place, and going to this land, this spacious, this good land, this land flowing with milk and honey, as we read in this Torah portion, represented by the promised land, which is Israel. And this is sort of the promised land that we're always trying to reach within ourselves, but also, as we're reading here, this promised land that's actually this physical space, but it represents the spiritual space. It's written in the last book of the Torah, justice, justice you shall pursue. And it is this very strict justice that Moshe exemplified that made him worthy to be our shepherd. King David writes in Tehillim, in Psalms, he shall judge the poor, rescue the needy, and break the oppressor. Usually understood to refer to the Mashiach, to the Messiah. Akedah Yitzchak points out that these are exactly the traits that Moshe embodied. And it is why he was chosen to be Israel's redeemer from our Egyptian exile. Just as the Mashiach, the Messiah, will be the final redeemer for our current exile. Breaking the psalm down, he shall judge the poor, paralleling the quarrel of the two Israelites when he intervened and said to the wicked one, why are you beating your brother? Rescue the needy refers to when Moses got up and came to Yitro's daughter's aid, and he shall break the oppressor refers to his smiting the Egyptian. Interesting to note that Moses seems to be asking that Hashem, God, send the Mashiach instead of him, to send the Messiah instead of himself. Send, I pray you, by the hand of whom you will send. The Midrash tells us that this is Moshe asking that Mashiach will be sent in his stead, meaning by the hand of the Messiah who will be the future Redeemer. Of course, as the story plays out, we see the request was not granted, as Moshe is the one meant to redeem Israel from the enslavement of Egypt and to the promised land flowing with milk and honey, as we read. We see here the connection between Mashiach, the Messiah, and Moshe and Moses, as it's written in the Zohar. Moses was the first and he will be the last Redeemer. What this means to teach us is that the redemptive power of the Mashiach is drawn from Moshe and that they share traits and characteristics. Rambam points out that our power to bring Mashiach is by virtue of following the Torah of Moshe, of these 5 books of the Torah and also the oral Torah. So there's the written 5 books and then there's the oral, which is the Talmud that we are quoting and all the things that surround. The Lubavitcher Rebbe expounds on this inner connection that is seen in the verse, and the scepter shall not depart from Judah until Shiloh come, ad ki yavo Shiloh. We see this through the gematria, which is the numerical value of the words yavo Shiloh and Mashiach, Shiloh come and Messiah, which are numerically equivalent. And we see the same numerical equivalence applies to Shiloh and Moshe. We also see that Yavo, come, is equal to Echad, 1, 13. We could infer that Mashiach is Moshe plus 1, meaning that Mashiach, the Messiah, the final redemption, will come through oneness, which is brought about and transmitted through Torah Moshe. So Moshe is the final redeemer. He's taken the Jews out of Egypt and brought them to the Holy Land, to Israel. And it's through this Torah that he receives on Mount Sinai and that manifests further through the Talmud, through the oral Torah, and how it got passed when we were worried that we would lose it. So this redemption is coming through the Torah that comes through Moshe, which is connected to Mashiach, which is the Messiah. As we have covered many times, every descent is for the sake of an ascent. And as we learn through Chassidut, our subsequent ascent is higher than the state before the descent. So what could be viewed in despair should be seen through a positive perspective. We see this throughout the timeline of our journey. Adam had 6 mitzvot, commandments. Noah had 7. And extra mitzvot were given to each patriarch, even though we learned that they kept all of the Torah before it was given. But when we fast forward through the initial journey to giving of the Torah, we see the closeness and the chosenness, and you have chosen us, is greater than all the moments preceding. The Lubavitcher Rebbe articulates that this was a revelation of Hashem, of God's essence, something that had not occurred in this way prior. As Isaiah articulates, the glory of the Lord will be revealed. The level of closeness and revelation of Hashem, of God, when Mashiach, when the Messiah arrives, will be far greater than any revelation experienced during previous redemptions. As we see in the last chapter, Yaakov is referred to, Jacob, as the choicest of the forefathers, implying his service was greater than that of his fathers, Abraham and Isaac. In regards to the other holy patriarchs, Avraham and Yitzchak, the Arizal teaches that their ways of relating to and serving God contain some element of imbalance, which manifests as an imperfection in their offspring. Unrestrained love, which Abraham embodied, can turn into loving the wrong things, and unrestrained awe, which Isaac, Yitzchak, embodied, can turn into awe of the wrong things. We see that although Avraham brought Yitzchak into the world, he also brought Ishmael into the world. And we see that Yitzchak brought Yaakov, Jacob, into the world, but he also brought Esav into the world. Only Yaakov, Jacob's sons, were all righteous because the attribute of mercy, which he embodied, he's the tiferet, he's the harmony, the beauty and mercy. By virtue of his complete connection to the Torah, is by definition intelligent emotionality, and as such can perfect both love and awe, and is resistant to improper application. Thus, it was Yaakov who brought B'nei Yisrael into the world, birthing our nation through the 12 tribes. Nevertheless, even decades later, with the revelations at Sinai that brought a transformation to holiness, our world was not yet utterly transformed, as we see shortly after, with the potential to sin played out through the golden calf. But in the time of the Mashiach, there won't be a temporal divine altering, but a shift from potential of impurity that manifests as the Sitra Achra, which is the other side, or the side that opposes godliness, to only one side, the side of Emet, truth. Division will be destroyed, which also will mean full internal unity in the absence of our divisive impulses towards evil. So this Torah that we have now for this reality starts with Breshit, with a bet, which is equivalent of number 2 in Gematria. But the Torah of the Mashiach, of the next world, of where we continue in the spiritual and in the redemptive state, that's the Torah Atika Stima. So it's this ancient hidden Torah that will be revealed, that right now, there is this reality of different potentials, as King Solomon says, Ze Lumat Ze, so everything has its opposing force, and it allows for free will, but it also allows for division and constriction, and all the fears and anxiety and all the crazy stuff that sort of is represented by the evil inclination, or the Sitra Achra, which is that which opposes godliness and holiness, or clarity and light, and all the things that could bring all of us together. So that is what the Mashiach, what the Redeemer represents, and that's also why Moshe is connected to the Redeemer, because he has us leaving Egypt, the constricted space, into and going into the Promised Land, the redemptive space. Falls bring elevation. The descent to Egypt brings the ascent to the Promised Land, and so it is within our own lives. Until the redemptive state, we can't only reap without sowing. We have to remember, when we sow through the hardships, the flip side of it is reaping the blessings. The Mashiach Prati, which is the personal redemption, as well as Klali, the communal redemption, is brought about by each of us revealing godliness in this world, to ourselves and to each other. The revelation at Sinai was from above. It was a temporal taste of what it is to come. of what's to come, the coming of the Mashiach. We can only do that from within. Ramban outlines this notion in his famous dictum, Maaseh Avot, Siman Labanim, which is the actions of our forefathers are prophetic indicators of what's to come. The stories of the Avot, our forefathers, are prophetic indicators of what's to come in future generations. The prophecies must be fulfilled because the Avot's actions actualize them. As an example, Avram's descent into Egypt alludes to B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel's enslavement there, and so on. We see in Avram and Abraham's journey that the history of B'nei Yisrael, the children of Israel, was rehearsed and actualized. Just as he went down to Egypt, we did the same through the Egyptian exile. But also, just as Avram went out of Egypt, we too were brought to Israel, to redemption. And just as Avram left weighed down with cattle, silver, and gold, we did the same, leaving Egypt with greater wealth. Avram started the descent for an ascent of the entire people. Moshe, beginning with this Torah portion, Shemot, that we're in now, took it further, bringing out the whole nation from slavery to freedom, and the revelation at Sinai, which brought Torah Moshe, the Torah of Moshe. The outlining of the mitzvot, of these commandments, that contain all the ways to purify oneself and elevate physically, and to elevate physicality. The Mashiach, the final redemption, takes this process, manifested through Moshe, to a level of perfection for the purity of the world. The prophet Jeremiah wrote the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which we read on Tisha B'Av. And there is this one pasuk, this one verse that really encapsulates exile and the promised land, constriction and redemption. Judah has gone into exile. Because of his misery and harsh oppression, he settled among the nations and found no rest. All her pursuers overtook her in the narrow places. So narrow places parallel the constriction of Egypt. In Hebrew, Egypt, as we spoke about, is Mitzrayim, which means straits, confinement, constriction. This stanza depicts our soul going from its infinite source into exile, constrained by physicality. The rectification of the exile of the divine presence is the process of ushering in, through awareness and action, the final redemption, which is to return to our source. We have to remember that to bring the redemptive state, we need to constantly refine our bitachon, which is this sweatshirt that I made, available on lightofinfinite.com. So to bring and refine continuously this bitachon, this trust, so that we truly believe in the goodness that holds the entire world and everything in it. We can only bring others to the truth when we are fully immersed in it ourselves. We can only bring others to the truth when we are fully immersed in it ourselves. Remember that. I actually got to write that down as a quote. I wrote this like 2 years ago. Truth in Hebrew is emet, which is the first, middle, and last letter of the Aleph Bet. Aleph, Mem, Taf. So, paralleling what is written in Isaiah, I am the first and I am the last, and beside me there is no God. There's nothing but Hashem, nothing but God. The truth, oneness, represented by the Aleph. To remove Aleph from emet is to be left with met. Met in Hebrew means death. The other side of truth is the Sitra Achra, literally the other side, which represents the opposite of life and of truth and opposes Hashem, God, by concealing oneness. It may feel like our generation is at a low or even a lower level than ever and every previous generation, but we're actually standing on the good deeds of those that came before us, connected to their souls, and our ascents and our final redemption comes from the previous hardships and the ascent that came from their descents. We are now in the time of the final redemption, closer than we have ever been. We need to tap into that reality, that truth, that oneness, and reveal what has previously been concealed. The revelation is becoming clearer than it's ever been. This is the blessing for us all. This is the first chapter in my second book, The Exodus of Darkness. Love you guys. Shabbat Shalom. Mashiach now.